Coming up on UFC Tonight. Back in Brazil in a big way, Jose Aldo puts his UFC title on the line, but can he bring his Brazilian best in his home country? Chad Mendes may have something to say about that. Money Mendes stopped by to tell us how he'll dethrone the 145-pound king. Anthony Johnson is ready to rumble at middleweight, but standing in his way, Vitor Belfort. How does the Phenom feel about being back in Brazil? Ariel Helwani has the answer. Also, Ariel checked in with George St. Pierre's camp. Find out the latest on the champ's recovery. And Jay Glazer sits down with past and current UFC champions in a conversation you don't want to miss.
It felt better than a woman at the time. I couldn't get enough. I didn't expect it. You know, I didn't realize that.
Good thing they get the next guy a new belt, because I don't think they want your belt.
Oh, you don't.
Ever wonder how to land the perfect uppercut? We bring in the California Kid to answer that very question. This is UFC Tonight. Let's hit it.
Got stopped. There's the power of Jose Aldo. This fight is all over. Jose Aldo retains his title.
Welcome to UFC Tonight, the official news and information source for everything you need to know about the biggest MMA organization in the world. I'm Todd Harris alongside Kenny Florian. And Kenny, the UFC lived up to the promise going back to Brazil as they kick off the 2012 year with a new focus on a Brazilian market. You've lived there before. How do you think this will be on impact-wise?
It's going to be amazing. I was there for the last card in Rio. The fans loved it. Rabid fans over there, very educated fans over there. The Brazilian economy is doing fantastic. This is a huge market for the UFC.
No question about that. Looking forward to it. A pretty nice main event for the UFC's return to Brazil with the featherweight championship on the line. Now, Jose Aldo defends his title for the third time against Team Alpha male wrestler Chad Mendes. Most people expected this fight to happen at UFC 133, but Aldo was forced out of that fight with a neck injury. Fast forward 5 months, and now they will lock up in the octagon. Let's look at the tail of the tape to see how they match up. Just one loss between the two men, Aldo with a bit of reach advantage over the shorter Mendes. Kenny, since Aldo's last title fight was against you at UFC 136 just a few months ago, let's look back at that fight with our UFC It Again segment presented by TaxSlayer.com. Kenny, a question I got to ask you is, what's it like to go 5 rounds with Jose Aldo?
Well, Jose Aldo is a very impressive fighter. He is considered one of the best pound-for-pound fighters in the world. And when you go in there with him, you better be ready for some serious speed. But really, what impressed me the most, you know, forget the leg kicking game, which is amazing, but he is a very smart fighter, very experienced, great cage awareness. He's one of the best.
Well, Kenny, a lot of people don't really understand how overwhelming Aldo's leg strikes can be in the cage. So let's head into the Fuel TV strike zone. Not many people have found the answers to Aldo's leg kick arsenal, and for good reason.
Yeah, you know, he is so fast, but the way that he lands them is through his setups. It's with his hands. It's the way he explodes with his footwork. It's hard to see them coming. And you know what? Uriah Faber knows best. He is a teammate of Chad Mendes, and I'm sure they've had a lot of conversation about that strong leg kicking game of Jose Aldo.
Well, these numbers courtesy of Fight Metrics showing just how effective and accurate Jose Aldo is with his kicks. In his WEC UFC career, he's landed 93 of 106 leg kick attempts. That makes him the most proficient leg striker in the UFC today. On the other end is the challenger Chad Mendes. Now, Mendes unbeaten in 11 career fights, but this will surely be his toughest test of his young MMA career. We had a chance to talk with Chad before he headed off to Brazil, and I asked him his thoughts on fighting Aldo in his home country.
For me, I would fight the guy anywhere. You know, this is a title fight. This is something you don't pass up. You know, and I feel like I'm prepared, and I've trained my hardest, and you know, set up a great game plan for this. So if it's Brazil, let's do it in Brazil. If it's in Vegas, let's do it in Vegas. You know, wherever. I mean, I know a stand-up is very explosive, very fast, but I feel like I have a lot of power in my hands. You know, and I'm very fast also. So and I haven't lost a round yet in any of my fights. So I'm able to push the pace. I'm able to wear guys out and take the fight wherever I want at any time in the fight. So I think that's key for beating a guy like Jose Aldo, who is very explosive and relies on being the dominator the entire time in the fight, where if I bring that guy into deep water, you know, it's going to be a whole different story. So, you know, there's only one way to find out, and we'll find out January 14th.
Good to hear from the #1 contender. No secret where he likes to take this fight. Many consider him the best wrestler in the 145-pound division. Kenny, can he keep Aldo on the canvas?
Well, he is the best wrestler in the 145-pound division, and the best way to counter a leg kick is with a good double leg takedown in the middle of the cage. And what that also does for Aldo is it can shut down his striking game. Anytime you have a threat of a takedown, it can definitely freeze up your striking. Mendes is going to have to be on with his wrestling all night.
Well, if there is a guy who could take Aldo down, it may be Mendes. He's landed 27 out of 40 takedown attempts during his Zuffa career. That's over 20% higher than any other fighter in the UFC right now. Predictions still to come later in the show. But now for this week's poll question. UFC fans were ecstatic when they heard that the UFC was headed back to Brazil last August. So now we ask you, where would you like to see the UFC go next? China, France, New York, or Russia? Go to facebook.com/FuelTV to vote. You can always track the results every day, every hour, every minute on our webpage. And here are the results from last week's poll question. We asked you, what is Brock Lesnar's next move? The overwhelming majority of you said Brock will disappear to Minnesota. Kenny, do you agree?
Absolutely. I don't think he likes getting hit to the body. He's going to stay put in Minnesota.
And you can always let your voice be heard. Go to facebook.com/FuelTV. Up next, we continue our preview of UFC Rio. Vitor Belfort back home for his first fight in Brazil since 1998. Can Anthony Johnson play spoiler to Belfort's Rio return? Or will the jump to middleweight? And later, Jay Glazer sits down with a few fighters who've tasted the title and how it felt when they became champion.
I got real sentimental. I mean, it's one of those things, you know, I want to thank everybody, all my college, my high school wrestling coach, my karate instructors.
UFC Tonight brought to you by TaxSlayer.com. Don't let taxes get you in a submission hole. File your federal return with TaxSlayer.com for only $9.95.
Oh, big shot by Johnson. But, oh, he tagged him to the left. Wow. Oh, big shot. That's the beat-up. Anthony Rumble Johnson.
Welcome back to UFC Tonight. Another big fight in Rio. One of Brazil's best, Vitor Belfort, up against Anthony Johnson, who has jumped up from the welterweight to middleweight division. Belfort fighting his native Brazil. And Kenny, what makes Belfort such a unique challenge at 185?
I really love this fight, Todd. You know, what makes Vitor Belfort so dangerous is his speed. He also has a tremendous amount of experience. He's a guy, once he smells blood, he goes right for the kill. Devastating striker, but he also is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. He can wrestle, trains with some of the best fighters out in Las Vegas at Extreme Couture. So just brings in a lot of weapons when he goes in there for fight night.
If there is one thing Vitor does well, it's finish fights. 14 of Belfort's 20 career wins have come by KO or TKO. And his last fight, an impressive knockout of Yoshihiro Akiyama at UFC 133. On the other side, Anthony Johnson moving up to 185. Now, Kenny, you fought in a few weight classes in your day. Good decision for Johnson to move up to 185?
This is really where he should be fighting. You know, you'd think he'd be the smaller man heading into this contest. Wrong. He is going to be the bigger man. He was a huge welterweight, and he's still going to be a huge middleweight. He is a devastating striker. I mean, he is all about violence. Even though he comes from a wrestling background, striking really is where he is most dangerous.
Well, Johnson didn't make this move because of a lack of success at 170, coming off of wins over Dan Hardy and Charlie Brenneman. The only loss in his last 6 fights coming at the hands of Josh Koscheck. And now we welcome in our UFC correspondent, Ariel Helwani. Ariel, we've just talked a little bit about Anthony Johnson's move to 185. Can you shed any light on how that transition is going for him?
Well, Todd, Anthony said last week that he feels, quote, 1,000 times better as a middleweight. He says he can eat more, he's more comfortable, he doesn't have to cut as much weight. And he said as of right now, he is not thinking of 170 anymore. He is very happy fighting at 185.
Let's go back to Vitor Belfort fighting in Brazil. How does he feel about this? He hasn't been there since 1998. What are his thoughts about going back to Rio?
Well, Vitor told me he's genuinely humbled to be fighting back in his home country. He's also very excited. He must have said that probably a dozen or so times in our conversation on the conference call. And remember, this is the beginning of a very big stretch for Vitor Belfort in his home country of Brazil. After this fight, he coaches on Tough Brazil opposite Vanderlei Silva, and then after that, they will meet most likely in Brazil. So this is the beginning of a very big year for Vitor back in his home country, fighting for the first time since 1998 there.
All right, thank you, Ariel. And later, Ariel is back in the show with an update on George St. Pierre. All right, Kenny, another great fight in this card in Rio. Edson Barboza facing Terry Edom. Let's start with Barboza, who burst on the scene in 2011. What makes him such a dangerous lightweight?
You know, it's his speed, it's his striking. He is such a technical striker, and he's a guy who can fight going forwards, he can fight going backwards. On top of that, he's very difficult to take down. We really haven't seen anybody who can dominate him with his wrestling, so he's just a real dangerous guy. Not a lot of lightweights are stepping up to fight this guy.
On the other side, Terry Edom, tall, effective striker. What does Edom have to do to stop Barboza's momentum?
Well, really, he's going to have to use his reach, and that reach can really pose problems for a lot of fighters. Use your reach, mix it up against Barboza, see if he can challenge him on the ground, and basically just keep at him and pressure him.
Another dangerous Brazilian, Rousimar Palhares, facing off with Mike Macenzio in a clash of middleweights. How do you like this one?
Well, it's a tough thing to shut down the submission game of Palhares, and for me, he's the best submission guy we have in the UFC. I expect Palhares to get it done with one of his famous leg locks.
Palhares, one of the most dangerous fighters in the UFC. We'll have your predictions a little later on in the show. Plenty still to come here on UFC Tonight. Jay Glazer takes you inside the octagon with Uriah Faber. Find out what move the California Kid is teaching today. And John Jones said he wanted some time off, but could Bones return sooner than expected? And before we go to break, we asked a few UFC fighters about what they fear the most. So check it out in the debut of a segment we like to call Ultimate Answers.
Biggest fear I have is to be broke.
The biggest fear is the anticipation of knowing through fight week, just knowing that you're going to get in the cage.
I'm afraid of heights is one of my biggest fears.
Probably insects. It's not a fear. I don't really, I don't have any phobias as such, but insects just freak me out. I can't really touch them. Don't get me wrong, if I was on some kind of reality TV show and I had to eat them or pick them up, for whatever, for some food, I could do that.
My biggest fear has to be zombies. I seriously believe that that's the one supernatural thing that's possible, that's realistic and possible.
Back on UFC Tonight, here's a look at some tweets of the week. Now, last week on the show, Chael Sonnen suggested a bottle of Listerine for Machida. Machida responded with a challenge to Sonnen, and here was Sonnen's rebuttal. I don't have time for pee-pee mouth. All the time I can spare him is enough to cold cock him and walk away. This one from Kenny Florian's old friend, Mandy Moore. Excited to watch my buddy Kenny Florian on UFC Tonight, 7 p.m. Pacific on Fuel TV. No mention of Todd Harris. Well, last week, Dan Henderson showed you a move. This week, Jay Glazer recruited the new Ultimate Fighter coach and former WEC featherweight champ to help teach him a move the pros use in this edition of the UFC 101, brought to you by The Gray in theaters everywhere on January 27th.
What's happening, gang? Jay Glazer, along with my man, former champion Uriah Faber. And I love when Fabes comes here with me because when do I ever get to be taller than somebody?
Yeah, you got me, you're about twice as thick there.
what are you trying to say? Why do you got to be so hurtful to me? Great thing about having Uriah here is Uriah, because he has such quick twitch muscles, he can do things, set up takedowns and shots like nobody else. What are you going to show us today?
I'm going to show the one where I fake the takedown, hit an uppercut. You saw it with Bowles.
Right, with Brian Bowles.
It's dangerous. They got to respect the takedown, and then lights out.
You really think I'm fat?
Big bone, big bone. All right, guys, this is a great setup for when you got a guy respecting your takedowns, and we all know Jay, he's scared of everything, so it's gonna work great on him.
Yeah.
So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna fake. I may have actually taken some takedowns in the fight. I'm gonna fake and get him to react. When I fake, he reacts. I'm coming up. Everything's staying in front of my body. I'm turning my hip over. Compound pressure. He's moving down. My fist moving up. and good night.
The whole reason for the fake is he's trying to get my hands down, but also lower my levels as well so he can get that extra pressure. Do it in real speed.
Here's real speed. Boom.
What day is today? Mom? Mom?
You can call me Dad.
Our thanks to Jay for the quick 101 and California Kid putting on a show. You ever do that move?
It's a great move. I haven't used it, but Uriah has used it with great success. Great way to confuse your opponent, make him look, make it look like you're going for a double leg. You come up with an uppercut and you take him out.
Well, one guy who won't be doing any UFC 101 moves in the near future is welterweight champion George St. Pierre. GSP was forced to pull out of his title defense against Nick Diaz when he suffered a torn ACL in training camp. St. Pierre will be in the studio with UFC Tonight next week to talk about the injury, when he could return, and his take on the welterweight division. But hey, who wants to wait a GSP, so we head inside the octagon with Ariel Helwani. All right, Ariel, you had a chance to catch up with St. Pierre's camp this week. How is his recovery going?
Well, great news out of the St. Pierre camp, Todd. His trainer, Faraz Zahabi, told me that rehab couldn't be going better. In March, he's going to be moving over to the Sports Science Lab in Orange County to work with a highly regarded trainer named Gavin McMillan there. He's worked with the likes of Troy Polamalu of the Pittsburgh Steelers. And if things continue to progress as they have, Faraz expects George to be back to 100% sooner than the original prognosis, which was 10 months.
All right, let's keep the champions talk going. John Jones said he wanted a vacation after defeating Lyoto Machida, his 4th fight of the year, but now it looks like Jones may be changing his tune. What do you know?
That's right. He told UFC President Dana White last week that he's got the itch. He wants to fight sooner rather than later. And Dana told me that this is the way the light heavyweight picture now shakes out in the UFC. If Rashad Evans beats Phil Davis on January 28th on Fox, he will be the #1 contender. Or if Phil Davis looks very good in that fight against Rashad Evans, he could be the #1 contender. They're sort of reserving the right to switch things up in that one. But right now, John Jones, he should be back sooner rather than later, and that is very good news for UFC fans.
All right, Ariel, good stuff as always. Enjoy the fights, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, Todd.
And one more note, a UFC Tonight exclusive. The UFC will be returning to Atlanta, Georgia on April 21st for UFC 146. It'll be the UFC's first trip back to Hotlanta since UFC 88 when Rashad Evans knocked out Chuck Liddell. Now it's time for Ask the Analyst. All right, Kenny, here we go. Gots to Grinds wants to know, is Bones Jones the prototype for the future, or is it too hard to type fighters?
It's too hard to type fighters. The sport is evolving just way too fast, yeah.
And last one, it's from Jay Fees. After seeing the Diaz versus Cerrone fight, does that give the UFC any more incentive to make co-main events 5-round non-title fights?
Well, it may be good for the fans, but I like to see the fight, the sport really stay pure. No need for a 5-round for that.
All right, just head to Twitter and send your questions to @FuelTV using the UFC Tonight hashtag. While you're there, be sure to follow us as well. Ask the Analyst for your chance to be a part of UFC Tonight. Still more to come here on UFC Tonight. Who will win the biggest battles in Brazil? When we return, it's prediction time. Kenny Florian picks the fights in Rio. And Jay Glazer chats with some champs. Jones, Griffin, Mir, Liddell. So grab your popcorn. When we get back, it's roundtable time.
I felt every angle on that metal, every twist and turn. It was like the best feeling ever.
UFC Tonight, brought to you by The Gray, starring Liam Neeson in theaters January 27th. UFC Tonight is brought to you by Little Caesars Large Hot and Ready Pizza. Always fresh, out of the oven, ready when you are. Welcome back. Let's take a look at UFC's upcoming events brought to you by Little Caesars. Remember to order your pizza for the UFC Rio pay-per-view this Saturday. It's Jose Aldo versus Chad Mendes for the featherweight strap. Just 6 days later, the UFC hits Nashville. And after that, UFC's second show on Fox comes at you on January 28th from Chicago. All right, now gold, it can come in many forms, but for any UFC fighter, they'll tell you when they think about gold, it's all about a championship belt. It's the primary goal for any fighter to become a champion. Yet only a few are able to reach the pinnacle of their sport. Fortunately for us, Jay Glazer sat down with some of the few fighters who can claim they were a UFC champion. So here is our Champions Roundtable.
When you won the title, You win, you realize the moment you win it, or the moment they put the belt on it. For those of us who've never been in that position, explain it. Put me in your shoes for that moment.
I wasn't happy. I've never actually been happy with almost any victory or loss or anything. At the end, the minute, it doesn't matter how well the fight goes, I run up to the room and, you know, the kids, hey, Daddy, you okay? Yeah, I'm fine, okay. And I pull the coaches in there and it kills them too. They're like, okay, it's time to go. No. When I threw the jab and the guy hit me with this,
wow.
You know what I mean? Like, I have like.
Analyzing.
Just overly critical. What about you?
I was just kind of like, okay, got that done. What's next? I was like, all right.
Gonna write it.
That's over with.
I got real sentimental. I mean, it's one of those things, you know, I want to thank everybody, all my college, my high school wrestling coach, my karate instructors, everybody, anybody that helped me, my grandfather, man, you know, he's the guy that told me, you know, yeah, you can beat anyone. And for me, you know, the only thing that was missing there was he wasn't there to see it. But, you know, it's one of those things, you know, you just get so emotional about it. I mean, I've been after that forever. I just always wanted, I was that guy that was supposed to be there, but I just never quite got there. And, you know, even after losing it when I got my first shot at it, and then coming back and winning and beating the guy that beat me, it was just, I mean, for me, I was very biggest moment, the highest high ever.
I felt every angle on that medal, every twist and turn. It was like the best feeling ever. It felt better than a woman at the time. It really did. I never thought I could touch metal in that way. It was just like I couldn't get enough. I didn't expect it. You know, I didn't realize that.
Good thing to get the next guy a new belt, because I don't think they want your
belt.
All right, again, Forrest Griffin, Chuck Liddell, Johnny Bones Jones, Frank Mir, thank you guys for joining us on our UFC Champions Roundtable.
Oh, good right hand by Forrest. Nice jab by Mir. Looking for a finish. Goodness, big elbows from Johnny Bones Jones.
If you want to check out more of Jay Glazer's Champions Roundtable discussion, check your local listings or go to fuel.tv. Now, I'm excited the UFC's headed back to Brazil, but where would you like to see the UFC go next? China, France, New York, or Russia? Again, go to facebook.com/FuelTV to vote. Now it's time for Fuel TV's final round. All right, here we go, Kenny. Anthony Johnson versus Belfort. Who do you like?
I'm going with Belfort for the win.
And in the main event, Jose Aldo, Chad Mendes, UFC featherweight title.
The champ is going to defend Aldo.
All right, sounds good. So on behalf of Chad Mendes, Jay Glazer, Ariel Helwani, and my partner, Kenny Florian, I'm Todd Harris. We'll see you next week for another edition of the UFC Tonight.